Meeting of NATO Defense Ministers. Day 2, Press Conference by NATO Secretary General. Q&As, International Version.
Thank you, Leila Mossadit, freelance journalist. I understand not will be press conference after Resolute Support meeting. What do you expect to come out of the meeting? Is Secretary Spare briefing on the latest development? Thank you.
So I expect the meeting to reconfirm a strong commitment from all the Resolute Support partners and NATO allies to Afghanistan, and to continue to be committed to our Resolute Support mission, to continue to train, assist and advise, and also provide financial support to the Afghan security forces, the Afghan army. Because this is in our interest, because a more stable Afghanistan is of course good for the people living in Afghanistan, but it's also important for people living in NATO allied countries. We have to remember that the reason why we went into Afghanistan was the 9/11 attacks against the United States, and we are in Afghanistan to make sure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for international terrorists. That is in our interest to prevent that from happening. The best way to do that is to create the conditions for a sustainable, peaceful, negotiated solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. And as I said, we support strongly the US talks with the Taliban, because we hope that they can lead to a peace process and create the conditions for inter-Afghan talks, inter-Afghan negotiations. And we will welcome any steps towards reduction of violence, because that is important to create the conditions for a real peace process. But again, Taliban has to show a real will and a real capability to deliver reduction of violence. And the best way for us to make that happen is to send a message that we stay committed to provide support to Afghanistan. And this is the message I expect from the Resolute Support mission meeting.
Okay, Arabs today. The gentleman over there.
Zaki Shahab from Arabs Today. It is not clear for us as Arabs, where NATO stands along the activities carried by Turkey, either in Syria or Libya, which most of us feel that is not online what NATO allies try to achieve in the region.
Well, NATO is not present on the ground in Libya. We strongly support the UN-led efforts to find a peaceful, negotiated solution. And that's the message from NATO and from NATO allies, is that we need a UN-led effort to find a negotiated solution, and we support that. Then we also stated that we stand ready to help Libya with capacity building if they ask for that, and if the conditions make that possible. But there is no NATO presence on the ground. We support efforts of also NATO allies, for instance, the meeting in Berlin, which took place a couple of weeks ago. We believe that's a good and important initiative to get the peace talks and the political process moving. On Syria, I would just briefly say that what we see now in Idlib is really, really serious. Again, hundreds of thousands of civilians are forced to flee. People are killed. We see indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets. This is horrendous, and we call on the Russian-backed Syrian regime to stop all the attacks and to engage in UN-led talks to find a peaceful solution.
Okay. Associated Press, up there. Yeah.
Lorne Cook, Associated Press, Secretary General. I just want to take you back to the discussion yesterday about Iraq, the Iraq mission. Obviously, I and quite a few of my colleagues were writing about it, and you suggested that Friday there might be some more movement to signal it. Is there anything that perhaps you can tell us that's happened in between time yesterday?
Well, between the press conference yesterday and today, we have slept and we have had one meeting where we discussed deterrence and defense. So not so much has happened. But it's right that I will meet with the global coalition to defeat Daesh tomorrow morning, and that just reflects the fact that NATO, of course, is closely coordinating and consulting with the global coalition, because we are working together with them in Iraq, and NATO is a member of the coalition, and we support the coalition. And now we are looking into how we can better coordinate, and also whether we can change some of the responsibilities between the coalition and NATO. We do this in close coordination with the coalition. We do it also, of course, in close consultation with the Iraqi government. I have spoken several times with the Iraqi Prime Minister, and NATO is in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government. The government of Iraq has confirmed to us their desire for continuation of the NATO training, advising and capacity building activities for the Iraqi armed forces, and we will only stay in Iraq as long as we are welcomed.
Okay. Lady over here.
Mr. General Secretary, I am from Ukrainian TV, and you have mentioned your morning meeting with the Ukrainian Defense Minister. In conclusion, after these negotiations, how do you estimate reforms in Ukraine, and how can we extend our deep cooperation with NATO? Thanks.
We had a very good meeting with the Ukrainian Defense Minister. All allies met with him, and the allies expressed strong support to Ukraine, to Ukraine's territorial integrity, to its sovereignty, and they also promised and stated clearly that we will continue to provide practical support and political support. The North Atlantic Council, we all visited Kiev and Ukraine not so long ago, and then we also went to Odessa, where we saw the Naval Academy, where we have NATO advisors, NATO trainers. We saw NATO allied ships in the harbor of Odessa, and I think this demonstrates very clearly that we speak about both practical cooperation and political support. Several NATO allies and also Canada that hosted the breakfast, they actually helped with training. They have trained thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and it is important for us to continue to support Ukraine. To do so, it is also important that Ukraine continue on the path of reform. We commend Ukraine for the progress they have made. We commend President Zelensky for the initiative he has taken to renew the efforts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. We welcome also, therefore, the new high-level meetings within the Normandy format. We welcome the fact that we have seen some prison exchanges, and also some disengagement zones has been expanded. So we have seen some progress. There are many problems. For instance, we see constant violations of the ceasefire. We see that the OSCE monitors are not able to operate freely and safely, but we strongly support the efforts to find a peaceful solution. This is a war going on in Europe, not far from NATO, and of course this matters for all of us.
Okay, we'll go over there. Yeah, gentleman over there.
Wojciech Cegielski, Polish Radio Secretary General. I would like to take the follow-up to the issue of INF Treaty, which you've mentioned, you've discussed this morning. What exactly does this package of measures contains? Will it be more exercises in Europe, or will they be more massive? And when this package will be fully ready, I would say. Thank you very much.
I think that it's important to understand that the deployment of the SSC-8 missiles, which violated the INF Treaty and led to the demise of the INF Treaty, they are part of a pattern we have seen over several years. Russia investing heavily in new modern capabilities, advanced missile systems, dual capable systems, and also systems that are reducing the warning time significantly and increases the risk for miscalculation, misunderstanding, and therefore also are serious challenges to the stability and the security of European allies. That's the reason why we have already started to respond to this pattern of Russian behavior. So we have already started to respond by implementing the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War, with high readiness of our forces, with combat-ready troops in the eastern part of the alliance, with investment in new high-end capabilities, and with increased defense spending. So we have to put the SSC8 into a broader picture, and NATO has already started to respond to this broader picture. Then we are looking into more specific issues related to the SSC8 and also other missile systems. And this is partly about exercises, partly about air and missile defense, conventional capabilities, and our nuclear posture, and of course also new initiatives on arms control. Because the best way of addressing this is to re-establish systems for arms control. We do whatever we can to prevent the new arms race. A new arms race, especially with nuclear weapons, is not good. It's dangerous and it is expensive. So therefore, we will continue to work for arms control to address the challenges and the gaps we now see after the demise of the INF Treaty. But let me underline that we will not mirror what Russia has done. We will have no intention of deploying land-based nuclear missiles in Europe, but we have to make sure that we have credible deterrence and defense also without the INF Treaty.
Okay, then we'll go over there.
My question is also about INF Treaty. As we know, Belarus is respecting INF Treaty even after it's over last year. But we see that Putin's pressure on Belarus is stronger and stronger. We're talking about so-called incorporation or integration. What do you think NATO can do to avoid potential dislocation of Russian missiles also in Belarus, not only in Kaliningrad? Do you think it's a good time to meet with Belarusian officials to talk about it, to talk about these initiatives?
So Belarus is a partner of NATO, and we appreciate the partnership with Belarus. And Belarus is a sovereign nation and take sovereign decisions, and we respect those decisions. We also urge, of course, Russia to respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all nations in Europe, including Belarus. So for us, this is about respecting that all the nations in Europe are sovereign nations with the right to make their own decisions without interference from neighbors.
Yeah, one last question, Jordan Times.
As Daesh threat remains, do you believe that your plan for beefed-up training in Iraq is enough at this stage, and could it be developed into something more in the future depending on circumstances? And how do you believe your plan would satisfy US President Donald Trump? Thank you.
So we have now started the process where we are going to increase our presence in Iraq. We are going to do it stepwise, and we will also look into what we can do beyond the current presence of NATO troops. So we are going to increase our presence. But of course we do that in close coordination with the Iraqi government, and every step we take will be in consultation and based on invitation, and only when we are welcomed by the Iraqi government. I think what we have seen is that the Iraqi forces have proven that they are capable of fighting Daesh, because the Iraqi forces have been on the forefront liberating the territory and the millions of people that ISIS controlled in Iraq not so many months ago. we supported them, meaning the global coalition, NATO, we supported them, all NATO allies are part of the global coalition, we supported them, but the heavy fighting, the soldiers on the front line, they were, almost all of them were Iraqi soldiers. So I strongly believe that the best thing we can do to make sure that ISIS does not return is, of course, to enable the Iraqis to fight Daesh in Iraq themselves. So training local forces is one of the best weapons we have against ISIS. Then we have to assess the need and to follow the developments closely and in close consultation and coordination, and based on invitation from the Iraqi government, we will also, of course, consider to step up, but that are decisions we have to take later on based on developments.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.